toilet, the key to modern civilization. From gravity drop holes in 16th century London to zero-gravity toilets in space, the convenience of this convenience has made modern living possible. But what happens when you flush the toilet? Where does the waste from an aeroplane go? And how does a 5,000-year-old toilet compare to a $5,000 one? Join Adam Hart-Davis as we take a look at the history and secrets of the toilet. Next on National Geographic Channel.
The scrubbing, the unclogging, the plunging, and the smell of the toilet. Sometimes we wish we could just flush all the hassles of the toilet down the toilet. But those dreaded chores aside, the toilet isn't all bad news. It helped turn Rome into an empire and has allowed us to boldly go where no man has gone before. But it's also been responsible for some of the world's deadliest plagues and is one of today's biggest social taboos. We have endless names for it.
The loo, the commode, the water closet,
the chamber pot.
But behind those deceiving names lurks a hidden truth. In fact, our very future may depend on our ability to plumb the murky depths of the toilet. We can't defy the laws of nature. And when nature calls, we answer. A healthy human produces about 225 grams of fecal matter every day. Multiply that by the world's population, and you get almost 1.5 million tons of waste. A daily global bowel movement equal in weight to 16 aircraft carriers. And it all has to go somewhere. For centuries, peasants in Asian cultures, from Vietnam to China, have been defecating into communal latrines and spreading the contents on their fields as fertilizer.
China has been crowded with human beings for 4,000 years. The need for human manure, I'm going to call it, in agriculture was evident, it was obvious.
In rural Thailand, some toilets are more interactive. Villagers relieve themselves in the bushes nearby, where domesticated pigs immediately gobble up the proceeds. In other Eastern countries like India and Turkey, the squat toilet is the norm. It's said that the squat position helps make bowel movements more comfortable. But the westernized world's approach to defecation is a little different. The vitreous China 6-litre flush-down siphon toilet is the preferred commode of the industrialized world. The average person uses it about 5 times every day. But do they ever get beyond the surface of their toilet?
It's something we shouldn't have to think about. When you flush, you should be able to walk away and not look back. It should be easy to keep clean, or hopefully not have to clean it at all.
Toilets flush more than 250 million times every day in the UK alone. And driving each flush is the same mysterious force that holds the universe together.
The energy source to make your toilet flush is gravity. We're dependent on the gravity of that 1.6 gallons of water flowing out, falling from the tank into the bowl, and that's the force that takes all the waste away.
Herman was a good fish.
Goodbye. Bye, Herman.
Goodbye, Herman.
He's alive! Herman's alive!
No matter what it's used for, it's an ingenious gravity engine.
This is just the bowl from a 2-piece. You can imagine the tank here and a bowl. But if I turn it around, we've cut this one in half so you can see the inside. It's fairly complicated and a lot going on.
The entire operation is triggered by this seemingly simple S-curve of porcelain pipe, known to plumbers as a weir.
At the back of the toilet, you have a wall or a weir that comes up and sets the level of the water. So you know that when you have the toilet bowl, there's a level of water that's always in there. And if you were to pour a little more water in, it would just fall off the back of that weir. And that's why the level is always the same no matter when you sit down on the toilet.
The water held in the bowl by the weir also performs another critical job. It prevents the fumes and noxious gases of the sewer pipes below from flowing back into the house. In essence, it produces a liquid seal until you flush.
When you flush your toilet, 1.6 gallons of water leaves the tank and enters this chamber. Part of the water goes into this chamber and around the rim. There are tiny holes in the bottom of the rim that allow the water to rinse the inside of the bowl and to gather the waste into the middle. And the rest of the water goes down this chute, comes around, and comes into the jet.
The sudden surge of water from the tank into the bowl forces the water level up and over the weir. The water then fills the drain pipe, creating a vacuum. As the first molecules of water fall, they pull the next ones along behind them, starting a chain reaction and vacuuming out the contents of the bowl.
All of the waste and water are pulled out, they go out through the drain, and then when the siphon breaks, the water refills and your toilet bowl is set to go again.
Your sparkling white bowl is made of vitreous china, a remarkably stain-proof material.
It's basically just a form of clay, but it's a very dense clay, and the surface is like glass. That's why it's called vitreous. And that means it's completely impermeable. No water will get into it. And that means that no bacteria can get in either.
When any sort of organism or microbe lands on it, there's nothing to hold on to, there's nothing to live off of, so it will die.
It's easy to use and easy to clean, but the toilet is so much more than that. In fact, it may be the key to civilization.
Much of society has been built around innovations in how to handle waste and how to cooperate on getting rid of waste.
The urine is sterile. You can drink it if you really want to. It won't do you any harm. But on the other hand, feces are dangerous because they contain massive quantities of bacteria.
About 3/4 of feces is water and 10% is undigested food. But the remaining 15% is all bacteria, billions of them. And it's these bacteria that give feces its distinctive smell.
Feces contain all the fibre that we can't digest that comes in the breakfast cereal and in fresh fruits and vegetables and so on. They contain the remains of dead blood cells, which is why it's brown, because that's what the remains are. It's stuff called bilirubin, which comes from broken down blood cells, and it contains enormous quantities of bacteria.
Most of those bacteria are harmless to humans and spend their lives processing the food inside our intestines. But some are lethal.
And if you ingest those bacteria, if you eat them, then you're going to get very ill.
Historically, the two great diseases that are associated with human waste are, of course, cholera. People can be perfectly healthy in the morning and be dead, literally dead in the evening. And typhoid, another horrendous disease that is terrifying in its various aspects in that it creates terrible welts and rashes and also terrible fevers and sickness among anyone who comes in contact with it.
Long before humans understood bacteria, and maybe even before they understood each other, they understood the danger bacteria posed.
So even the primitive cavemen would not have gone to the lavatory in their cave because the ones who did would have died out.
What we now think of as civilization could not have flourished had we not first battled our own waste and the diseases it carried. As soon as humans began living together in large numbers, toilets became a priority.
Not only did civilization start with the onset of writing, but it also started with man actually coming and getting a hold of his sanitation needs.
creation of sanitary systems were in some sense the basis for creating great cities and great communities.
Even in mankind's earliest attempts at community, we find ancient experiments with toilets. The oldest loos may be in the village of Skara Brae in what's now northernmost Scotland. They date from 3000 BCE.
There are 9 or 10 houses, and in the corner of each house there is a little doorway and a little cubicle inside and a hole in the floor, and from those holes drains go down, collect together and go down towards the sea. They're 5,000 years old. Absolutely amazing. Now it's almost certain that they use water to flush them with because they wouldn't have worked without.
From ancient Greece to Pakistan, city builders found brilliant new ways to pump water into their cities and then pour it down a toilet.
And the ones we know about best are at the palace at Knossos on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. And that had wonderful lavatories with marble seats and cisterns and clever arrangement of flushing.
But the undisputed champions of ancient toiletry had to be the Romans.
Rome was not built in a day, but it was built around its water supply system and its ability to get rid of its material without polluting itself or polluting the people downstream.
Their development of the bathroom was incredible. Middle-class Romans in their homes were able to hook up a private bathroom to the public sewer system that Rome had developed and actually have the waste carried away to the main sewage disposal plant.
But most Romans didn't have toilets in their homes. They opted for a more social experience. 144 public bathrooms were scattered throughout Rome by 315 CE. Visitors would sit on communal benches, while water ran through a gutter beneath to flush the waste away.
And they were just as social as the bathhouses. People would sit right next to each other, converse and talk while they were going to the bathroom.
At the empire's peak, 420 kilometers of aqueducts poured so much water through the imperial capital that even working-class Romans could get their hands on more than 65 liters a day. But with all that water and all that waste, there flowed some fatal problems.
The minute we started to use water to carry waste, instead of using water to wash with and to drink with, big trouble.
If you dump your human waste into the river upstream and you drink the water downstream, you've created more of a problem than you've actually addressed.
The toilet was about to turn deadly. Today's gravity toilet is an amazingly simple device. A tank, a bowl, a siphon, a tank valve, and a refill valve. Together, they make for a clean, simple flush every time. So how did this sanitary wonder contribute to a health crisis that almost wiped Western civilization off the map? The glories of Elizabethan England included swordplay, mandolins, and Morris dancers. But they didn't include a toilet.
They would go in the corners of stairwells, they would go in chimneys, they would go in the corners of the house, they sometimes would go behind tapestries, anywhere that they didn't have to inconvenience themselves by going outside.
But Romans had enjoyed clean, water-flushed bathrooms 1,000 years earlier than this. So what had gone wrong? Unfortunately, around 400 CE, the Roman Empire and its commode went down the toilet.
We seem to have gone back to more primitive times. We seem to have forgotten about proper flushing and so on. Nothing much happened for 1,000 years.
People with money and power did sometimes install a garderobe, a stone closet from which your waste fell into a cesspit or your castle's moat. But it wasn't until the late 1500s and the reign of Queen Elizabeth I that someone really tried to clean things up a bit.
The first new water closet that we know about was invented by a man called John Harrington, Sir John Harrington. He was a godson of Queen Elizabeth I, and he invented a thing called the Ajax, which was actually a terrible joke, because the word then for a privy was a jakes, and so Ajax was meant to sound like a jakes.
Harrington promoted the Ajax in a volume he published in 1596. His book was a highbrow look at a lowbrow subject, a how-to manual for building your own water-flushing toilet.
And this was a big wooden commode with a sort of a seat you sit on, and when you'd finished, you pulled up a handle, and that allowed water to run through from the cistern behind into the container underneath and then out through pipes into the garden.
Supposedly, both the Queen and Harrington used the Ajax, but it never really caught on. For one thing, the pipe that drained waste below the seat was straight, so any smelly gases leaked right back into the house. But Harrington did get a few things right.
He had the bowl, but there wasn't a siphon tube invented yet, so it didn't hold water. There was the tank, and there was the flapper valve. So with those three parts, he had the essentials of the modern toilet. Just took a couple centuries to get all the details worked out.
For the next 200 years, most European city dwellers lived a more natural existence, often using stone-lined cesspits dug right in their own backyards. Londoners would relieve themselves into chamber pots in their bedrooms at night. Then, when the sun rose, simply fling the contents out of the window and into the street.
Now, you wouldn't necessarily want to empty it onto anyone's head, so you would shout out, "Gardez l'eau," which is from the French, "Gardez l'eau," watch out for the water.
This practice gave rise to the word loo, and also inspired the next generation toilet. In 1775, a London watchmaker named Alexander Cumming came up with this.
He patented a water closet which had a sliding valve underneath. When you'd finished, you pulled a handle and the valve would slide out, allowing all the sewage to go down, and then you'd fill it up again with water, waiting for the next person.
Cumming's sliding metal door, together with the development of the S-curve trap, helped to solve the problem of smelly sewage. But one important factor was still missing.
In those days, water closets were very rare because we didn't have piped water to most houses and we didn't have proper sewers.
Without working sewers, waste from these fancy English toilets simply poured into the overflowing cesspits of the city. Uncountable litres of festering feces and urine soaked into the ground.
If you have a privy and it's not too far away from your pump, you're going to have a real problem. You may literally be drinking the excrement that you're dumping the day before.
And sewage that percolated into the soil of one well-fertilized lush garden could spontaneously erupt in the basement of the house next door.
Absolutely disgusting. And when they had drains, the drains simply went out into the streets. So all the streets were running with sewage, and when there were drains in the streets, they didn't actually go anywhere.
But then the question is, where does it go? Where it went was to the rivers.
From the rivers, the toxic water got pumped right back into thousands of homes. By the dawn of the 19th century, this seemingly clean practice had become an enormous health hazard.
8 per 10 children born would die at certain points in urban history in London or in Paris, and even at certain points in New York.
It's really terrifying. And they died because of contamination of the drinking water by sewage.
As London's population swelled to over 1 million people, entire neighborhoods were flooded with their own feces. But the filth and stench were the least of their worries.
Cholera had been moving east from Asia into Europe. And in 1832, it had reached Paris and it had reached London, and it was a very, very serious disease.
Between 1831 and 1832, 50,000 Brits died of cholera. In Paris, cholera killed 18,000 in a single summer. The US was next.
We never expected to hit here. And then 1832, it hit Boston, it hit Philadelphia.
With the help of the remarkable new flushing toilet, the westernized world was drowning in its own excrement.
We didn't have the concept of how germs can spread. It was just a different world in which we thought that disease was often the act of God.
The solution was simple: add more water. In England, the Public Health Act of 1848 mandated some form of toilet in every home.
They had that amazing idea that it didn't matter what you put it in, that the running water will clean itself up.
This law probably contributed to the great watershed moment of British plumbing, the Great Stink of 1858.
(1858) was a long, hot summer, and all that sewage sat in the river, and the banks of the river were sloping muddy banks, and the sewage gradually decomposed on these sloping muddy banks, and the smell was indescribable.
The smell and the germs finally led British politicians to an effective solution: high-capacity sewers. In London, New York, and cities around the world, millions of dollars were pumped into state-of-the-art public sewer lines that carried the waste and the smell far away from town.
They're sort of monuments to excrement, if you like. And I've been down the sewers, and it's absolutely amazing how well they were built. The stuff running through them is not fun, but the sewers themselves are utterly brilliant.
Many of these 19th century sewer systems still exist and function today. But engineers were planning more than just sewers. As the industrialized world began to travel, so did toilets. Spaceflight may be the most stunning achievement of human engineering. But since the dawn of the space age, one question has puzzled the public. How do you relieve yourself in zero-gravity space? It wasn't a question NASA engineers originally anticipated. For America's first manned spaceflight on the 5th of May 1961, astronaut Alan Shepard sat squeezed into a tiny Mercury capsule known as Freedom 7. His mission into space was scheduled to last no more than 16 minutes, but bad weather kept his rocket and him waiting on the launch pad for over 4 hours.
Alan Shepard was sitting in a spaceship waiting to take off, and he had to go to the bathroom.
At T-minus 15 minutes, America's first astronaut had to go.
Here you are in the capsule waiting, and you just can't say, stop everything, I'm going to go back down to the local commode.
So NASA engineers came up with a brilliant, though low-tech solution.
He asked permission to go to the bathroom, and they told him just to go in his suit.
Shepard urinated in his spacesuit, and the countdown continued.
1.2 G, Kevin at 14 PSI.
The incident taught NASA doctors an important lesson. So the next time an American rocketed into space, he had a reservoir attached to his thigh for collecting urine. Most Project Mercury flights lasted only a matter of minutes or hours, but for the longer Gemini and Apollo missions, this would translate into a hefty load.
You're talking about maybe a week or two in space, so therefore you just had to start worrying about those things. The real difficult part of that was there was no room for the classic sit-down, Earth-like commode.
In a way, the challenge NASA faced was nothing new. It was just the next step in a long line of efforts to make going on the go possible. For the first seafaring sailors, the answer was simple. The ocean was their highway and their sewer, as long as they were in the right part of the boat.
On ships, they always call toilets the heads because they were always in the head of the ship. Now, when you think about it, you can't do that halfway along one side of the ship, because if you do that, when you're sailing, the ship would heel over like that and they'd be underwater half the time, and the rest of the time they'd be like that, and all the stuff would go onto the side of the ship.
Trains didn't fare much better. While the invention of the steam engine in the early 1800s opened up a whole new world of travel, it closed its doors to toilets. The Great Western Railway opened its line between Bristol and London in 1841 with no toilets on board.
America actually led the world when it came to to train toilet technology. And what we had was a hopper, which basically funneled down to a hole, and that hole dumped the waste right onto the track.
That may seem primitive, but America's Amtrak train line was doing this as recently as the year 2000. In fact, dumping waste from moving vehicles was catching on. Early aeroplane lavatories were no more than a funnel attached to a hose that led right outside the plane. During World War II, the funnel was replaced with a bucket, and it was the job of one unlucky crew member to dump the receptacle during the flight. But dump and go went out the window once aeroplanes embraced chemical toilet technology.
The toilet system in an airplane is actually fascinating. So you've got two problems you're trying to solve. You've got the odor problem. You can't have any odor in an aircraft. And you've got the turbulence problem. You can't have any kind of splashing or any weirdness going if you hit an air pocket.
In early chemical toilets, scientists concocted a mixture of formaldehyde and perfume to kill bacteria and odors. The chemicals were kept in a well below the bowl, so they didn't splash about. But today's aeroplane toilets are a lot more sophisticated.
So what you've got in an airplane is a big holding tank in the belly of the plane, and it's like a giant wet-dry vacuum cleaner.
The vacuum system sucks the contents of the toilets into a large chemical reservoir in the belly of the plane. Meanwhile, a pump floods the bowl with filtered chemicals to wash it down. The heavy load in the holding tank is pumped out after landing.
Now, the really cool part is that when you get at altitude, there's pressure inside the airplane and there's not that much pressure outside, and you can actually use that pressure differential to pull the vacuum on that tank, and you don't have to use the wet, dry vacuum motor anymore when you're at 30,000 feet.
But despite all these advances, when it came to mankind's most audacious journeys, NASA couldn't use any of the lessons learned on planes, trains, or clipper ships for one simple reason: gravity.
On Earth, gravity handles our waste for us. It actually pulls the waste away from our body, puts it in water, and then gravity pulls the water out of the toilet. So you got to come up with something completely different in space.
NASA approached the Whirlpool Corporation in 1962 for a solution. And 3 years and millions of dollars in research and development later, Whirlpool presented 2 plastic bags.
They physically had individual bags for collecting urine and individual bags for fecal matter.
The astronauts dealt with urine railroad style. After relieving themselves, they'd simply empty the urine bags through a valve in the side of the capsule. The liquid would then instantly freeze, creating a surprisingly beautiful blossom of crystals. But the fecal collection bag was an entirely different matter. After untaping them from their buttocks, the astronauts would have to toss in a packet of chemical germicides, seal the bag, and then knead the whole mess together like a dough, a process that took close to an hour.
I have to give credit on these early astronauts. You just said, excuse me, and did your thing.
3, 2, we have ignition, we have a liftoff.
Finally, with the creation of the Skylab in 1973, Bottoms got a break. NASA introduced the high-tech WCS, or Waste Collection System.
It's effectively putting yourself upstream of a fan, like the old Eureka vacuum cleaner, if you can envision that in your mind. We have a very gentle airflow that tends to whiff across your tush, so to speak, to pull the body waste away from the body.
Wetting one's spacesuit is definitely a thing of the past. Today, you'd need a user's manual to operate the high-tech shuttle and International Space Station loos.
What you do is you approach the commode, fly in from zero gravity, and you lift up the lid. And you can hear a fan come on. And also you look in here, there's no water, but there is a bag.
The bags are made of a material called expanded polytetrafluoroethylene, an ultra-thin web of Teflon-like material that doesn't leak.
There's no pressure. Okay. In order to safely store the material and compact it, first we put a lid on here, and again the airflow pulls it down in nice and gently. And now we can manually push this into a compaction mode.
The bags are compacted into small patties and stored at the bottom of the receptacle. Urine takes a different path. A urinal hose is attached to the astronaut's personal funnel.
You can see the male funnel and the female funnel. I will take the male funnel, physically snap it into the end of the urinal, and if you want to, it's located such that you can simultaneously urinate and defecate at the same time, or you can individually use as a urinal.
With limited resources available at the space station, conserving and recycling as much air and water as possible is critical. So amazingly, the urinal extracts water from the urine, cleans it, and then pipes it back into the living quarters. If man ever makes it as far as Mars, 56 million kilometers away, astronauts may have to find a way to reuse their feces as well. So NASA is already on the case, working on a zero-gravity compost machine. Nature calls again. Or does it? This bowl full of bodily waste is actually artificial. One of many testing materials used by the engineers at American Standard to evaluate the efficiency of their latest toilets.
For health and safety reasons, when we test new toilets and new toilet designs, we don't use real waste. There's a range of different media that we use for testing products. One of them is restaurant-grade miso. We have miso inside these latex containers. I have 10 of them here, and you can see we'll put those in and flush. And this represents more than normally would be found waste in a toilet bowl.
Liquid drain.
You don't generally see human waste on television.
When I have to go in and clean the bathroom bowl.
In fact, the toilet is often an immensely powerful but unspeakable taboo.
Today's bathrooms are luxurious.
Well, it's too horrible to describe. Dreadful.
One that has influenced everything from politics to pop culture.
That's my toilet for me. This is the American Standard champion.
The word toilet, even though it's not an obscene word, it's not dirty, it's not anything. If someone says, oh, I've got to go to the toilet, that still sounds really gross.
The bathroom is a room with a bath in it. A water closet is a cupboard with water piped into it. None of these expressions actually describe the object. It's very bizarre.
Let's face it, how many times do you use the toilet in a bathroom versus how many times you use the bath in a bathroom? It didn't become the toilet room, it became the bathroom.
It seems we've erected a lot of privacy walls around our bathroom matters.
How are you? Not bad. Mind if I come over? I'd rather you didn't. I'll call you back. Some kook in the other stall keeps talking to me.
For most of history, all bathrooms were more or less public bathrooms. Privacy certainly wasn't a concern in the latrines of Rome.
It was not segregated as far as we know. Men and women used them together. You would go and defecate with your friend just like you might go and have a latte today.
And even 1,000 years later, people were still accustomed to company while relieving themselves.
Certainly we see in history the examples of bathrooms and outhouses and privy areas that had multiple seats, and there were more than one person in there at a time.
And for safety and other reasons, the entire family would go out to the outhouse together and all do their bodily functions together at the same time.
Things changed dramatically in 19th century England.
This country develops much of its history in the Victorian era, where we were not only not talking about the intimate taboos of the body, there were people who were actually separating in their libraries the books by males versus the book by females, so they wouldn't somehow decorously mix.
People wanted to use the bathroom by themselves. Then, all of a sudden, people wanted to have their own bathrooms.
Toilet designs flooded the patent offices in the late 1800s. By the early 20th century, an indoor toilet was considered a necessity, and before long the bathroom had become a bastion of privacy.
I think Western society, and I think especially American society, is particularly good at being really, really embarrassed and really, really uncomfortable about our own bodily functions.
I wonder what's going on in there. They sure do keep it hush-hush.
Even the first paper specially designed for the human posterior hid its true purpose and shame. The word toilet didn't appear on the wrapper.
When toilet paper first hit the market in 1895, the Scott brothers were afraid to even associate their name with it. It was a Victorian era, and it was an unmentionable product for an unmentionable procedure.
It's this kind of pact we've all got that we all know everybody does it, but we're all going to kind of pretend that none of us do.
American popular culture reflected this taboo more than most. For most of the 20th century, to mention a toilet on American television, much less show one, would have been a grotesque violation of public taste. In 1960, NBC censored Tonight Show host Jack Paar from using the phrase water closet. He quit in protest. Even the sound of a toilet flushing wasn't heard on television until the 1970s, and the hit show All in the Family.
There was an accepted rule in television up right into the 80s that you didn't show a toilet bowl. You could kind of show a room with a toilet in it, but you never showed the bowl. The Tidy Bowl man, if you noticed, wasn't in the bowl, which would have made sense. That's what you want to keep clean. That's what you wash.
Tidy Bowl man here with the old miner and his mule, and great news.
The Tidy Bowl man didn't float in the bowl. He floated up in the tank because the idea was that it would be way too unseemly and in terrible taste to actually show a bowl.
Tidy Bowl works harder, so you won't have to.
But those Victorian values may not be so far behind us. Just try to find a polite word that simply means toilet. The word itself is a euphemism, a term taken from the Victorian ladies' morning wash.
I think in a culture where you feel the need to run the water while you're peeing, if you're where somebody could hear you, and by the way, I would do this too. I'm not immune from this. I think there's something a little sick about that.
These days, we've gone from being public in private to private in public, and it's largely down to technology. In 1981, French company JCDecaux introduced the city of Paris to the public restroom of the 21st century. And today, users from Singapore to San Francisco can receive its state-of-the-art experience for a nominal fee. Floor sensors automatically detect when someone steps inside and automatically activate a retractable toilet and sliding door. Once the patron steps outside, a sanitary wash cleans the entire unit. From flush to wash down, only 5 liters of water are used. But the true toilet of the future may not use any water at all. More than any other invention, if you build a better toilet, the world will beat a path to your store. Every year, 1.4 million toilets are installed in homes in England, and the options are startling. Those who want the Rolls-Royce of restrooms might want to test drive a Toto Neo Rest. Features on this $5,000 Japanese luxury commode include a warm water spout to wash your behind and an air jet to dry it off. Some Totos even make loud, soothing sounds designed to cover up any more embarrassing bathroom noises.
Japanese culture is unique, and there's many things in Japan that would lead Toto to develop a $5,000 toilet. The first thing you have to realize about Japan is there are so many people in such little space. And in particular, the way houses are designed in Japan, there's very little privacy, especially from sounds.
The toilets of the future may be defined not by the extravagant extras they have, but by what's missing: water. Every day, Americans flush away 70 million kilograms of feces, and they use about 120 billion liters of water to do it. And after crossing the city in the sewers beneath the streets, the matter usually ends up at a place like this.
Sometimes we have visitors come in and they kind of curl up their nose, and then we say to them, what do you think we're doing here, baking cakes? We're trying to transport wastewater sewage for 2.5 million people.
Flush a toilet in Boston and the proceeds are likely to end up here, in this plant on Deer Island in Boston Harbor.
Now you see the screen coming up, and it's basically pulling the debris off of the screens and out of the wastewater. It's personal hygiene items, it's stuff that probably I shouldn't be talking about.
In a very real sense, this plant and others like it are an indispensable part of the toilet in your bathroom. Their mission is to get all the things you put into the water back out again.
Plus you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of pathogens in that water. That's still raw wastewater. It's sewage. It's from your toilet, it's from your washing machine, from your dishwasher, and it's raw and it's ugly.
Untreated waste still contaminates the water supply in 90% of the world's developing countries. As a result, 5 to 10 million people die from water-related diseases every year. Cities cracked down on water quality in the 1920s, filtering and treating their sewage. But the toxic nitrogen and phosphorus in human waste still depletes oxygen levels, disturbing the aquatic balance in rivers and often killing wildlife. In 1980, this is exactly what was happening in Boston Harbor.
Deplorable. On any given day, we were putting raw sewage into the harbor. The minimal treatment plants that we had were obsolete and broken down. The pumps didn't work. Not too long ago, one of the main ways they disposed of sludge was to put them in tanks, and when the tide came in, just flushed it out.
Today, this remarkable state-of-the-art waterworks processes 1.3 billion liters in a single day. It's a complex procedure. Large debris gets screened out first when the water is pushed into a slow drift, allowing solid materials to settle to the bottom. The remaining water then gets filtered, scrubbed, sterilized, and piped 15 kilometers into the Atlantic. Meanwhile, the sludge that settled to the bottom of the water gets pumped into huge vessels called digester eggs.
All right, we've got 12 digesters here, and what's going on inside of each of these digesters is that there is a big mixer in there that's basically rotating that goop, if you will, around while the bacteria eats it.
Inside these futuristic vessels, the same bacteria that have digested waste for millions of years are used to help turn the sludge into organic fertilizer. Plants like this carry a $4 billion price tag, a bill that only wealthy nations like Sweden, Japan, and the United States can afford. But even with all this state-of-the-art equipment, we still let billions of liters of water go down the drain every year. Billions of liters of water go down the drain every year.
Every time you flush an ordinary lavatory, you're throwing away 10 litres, maybe 2 gallons of expensive drinking water. And we have a terrible world water problem.
Lack of drinking water contributes to the death of 4,500 children a day.
This is a $250 billion problem, and it's going to require just as much of an investment to come up with a solution.
Perhaps this is why the toilets of the future may use no water at all.
The first thing you notice about it is that there is no water connection. It is, in fact, completely waterless.
Another futuristic hopeful is the composting toilet.
It's just a large opening with a chute that connects to the composting tank down below. The user will do everything that they would typically do in a toilet. Waste and toilet paper will enter the system, and it will drop down by gravity to the composting bin. Over here, we have a small container with what we call bulking material, and this is really pine shavings. And the user, in fact, is participating, you might say, in the maintenance. After they've finished with the toilet, they will take a handful and drop it down. And what that does, it actually helps create the proper texture inside the composting system so that the breakdown of waste can be accomplished. We have here the composting container. There are several of these in the structure that serve all of the toilets inside the building.
In the composting bin, body waste returns to nature. Millions of tiny creatures break it down and eat it up, just as they would on the forest floor. A system of fans keeps the odor of the process from creeping up the waste pipes. After a year, most of the water has completely evaporated, reducing the waste to just 1/10 of its original volume. And it smells just like soil.
When it does come out, it no longer has a resemblance to feces. In fact, not. You can see some of the compost worms and other insects that have broken down the waste into a source of micronutrients which are crucial for the soil, and also it's got a high humus content, which means it helps improve the soil's ability to support life.
The Chesapeake Bay Foundation in Annapolis, Maryland, has been utilizing the same composting process for over 5 years.
We just started to take compost out of the bins after 3.5 years. It works wonderfully. As you look around, you can see that the grass where we have put it is higher and greener than the grass that surrounds it.
Are composting toilets really the way of the future? They still have a long way to go before they'll be fully embraced by the public.
The problem is, people aren't going to give up convenience for less convenience, even if it's the right thing to do.
We need to turn to something that is beautiful, odorless, convenient, pleasant to use, and does good, not harm.
Environmentally, it would be better if people used composting toilets or earth closets, but the trouble is they require a lot more effort.
Whatever your preference, and whatever you call it, the toilet is one of the unsung heroes of our civilized world. But we need to become more environmentally conscientious before we'll truly be sitting pretty.